We will now turn to the President of NCAI, Mark Macarro. Welcome, Mark. Chairman, President.
Thank you, Chairman Murkowski, Ranking Member Schatz, and the other distinguished members of this committee for holding this roundtable on prediction markets. My name is Mark Macarro, and I am the President of NCAI, the National Congress of American Indians, and also the Tribal Chairman for the Pechanga Band of Indians in California. And today I want to raise three primary points. The first is the regulatory framework of the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, that it must be respected. Congressional intent was clear when the act was promulgated, that Congress never intended the Commodity Exchange Act to preempt IGRA, the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act. When Congress passed IGRA, it was unambiguous. Tribes hold exclusive jurisdiction over gaming on Indian lands, operating within a framework built through the decades of negotiation among tribes, states, and the federal government. And so for over 30 years, that framework has worked. Tribes and states have negotiated compacts that protect consumers, ensure regulatory accountability, and affirm and strengthen tribal sovereignty. This framework, however, did not happen by accident. It was built deliberately through hard-won negotiation and sustained efforts. But watching a fundamentally distinct federal agency step into this space without authority, without consultation, and without regard for the existing framework is deeply troubling. It usurps all the infrastructure for successful tribal gaming. Today, prediction markets are being used to offer sports and event betting entirely outside the framework Congress created for Indian gaming, thereby undercutting tribal nations' status as sovereign regulators in this space. By relying on commodities and derivatives law instead of gaming law, operators are attempting to sidestep tribal state compacts and IGRA altogether. This sets up a dangerous precedent where federal agencies could bypass congressionally affirmed tribal rights whenever it's convenient, provided that they dress the workaround in unfamiliar legal language. So, make no mistake, nothing in the legislative history of the CEA suggests that Congress ever intended the CFTC to become a backdoor regulator of gaming. The CFTC was created to oversee commodities and derivatives, not to create, tolerate, or bless a shadow framework for sports and event betting that Congress never authorized it to regulate. In fact, the legislative record confirms this. During the 2010 Dodd-Frank debate, Senator Blanche Lincoln, then the Senate Agricultural Committee, the chair of the Ag Committee, and an author of the Dodd-Frank Derivatives Amendment, engaged in a colloquy with Senator Dianne Feinstein, making this point explicitly. Senator Feinstein emphasized the importance of restoring the CFTC's authority to stop trading that runs contrary to the public interest, warning that derivatives traders had already wagered billions on contracts serving no legitimate commercial purpose. Senator Lincoln, however, went further, stating plainly that the CFTC needed the power to prevent derivatives contracts that exist predominantly to enable gambling through so-called event contracts. Senator Lincoln specifically warned that it would be easy to construct event contracts around sporting events like the Super Bowl, the Kentucky Derby, or the Masters, contracts that would serve no legitimate commercial purpose and exist solely for gaming. And I'll just add that this year's Super Bowl in San Francisco, one of these prediction market operators, Kalshi, wagered. Well, there were over $1.5 billion that were wagered on the Super Bowl through Kalshi's platform alone. So just a couple of weeks ago, we heard from Senator Christopher Dodd, the author of the Dodd-Frank Act, who stated that when Congress passed the act, lawmakers were well aware of existing federal and state gaming laws and, quote, had no intention of amending those laws to turn the CFTC into a national gambling regulator. So this is not ambiguous legislative history. This is Congress, on the record, warning exactly against what we are seeing play out today. Fundamentally, the CFTC's claim of authority to regulate prediction markets represents a sweeping federal overreach that threatens tribal and state sovereignty and a separation of powers issue, where an executive branch agency defies statutory authority and congressional intent. So NCAI calls on the United States Congress to exercise its constitutional prerogative and end the prohibited gaming under this captured agency. The second issue is revenue that's generated from tribal gaming operations and that it funds critical services for tribal and non-tribal members alike. and CFTC-regulated event contracts that mimic casino-style gaming threaten this vital source of support. So, tribal gaming revenue is not simply a matter of tribal enterprise. It is the financial backbone of essential services in Indian country. And this revenue funds healthcare, education, housing, infrastructure, public safety, and countless other programs that tribal communities depend on every day. When that revenue is diverted, so too is the ability of tribal governments to meet their responsibilities to serve their citizens. Put it this way, every dollar wagered on unregulated gaming like illegal prediction markets is a dollar pulled away from tribal jobs, tribal facilities, and tribal community programs. These event contracts are not a neutral alternative. They compete directly with regulated tribal gaming for the same consumer dollars, but without the compacts, without oversight, and without revenue-sharing obligations that channel gaming proceeds back into public services. And the scale of what's at stake is significant. Tribal gaming supports hundreds of thousands of jobs in the United States, and a majority of which are in rural America, and generates billions of dollars in annual economic activity that could be steadily eroded and as an unregulated events contract market siphons off this revenue, the tribal revenue. Tribal gaming revenue doesn't just support tribal communities. It funds critical services for non-natives as well, and allowing the CFTC-regulated event contracts to encroach on this space does not just threaten tribal sovereignty and self-sufficiency. It threatens a funding stream that benefits state and local economies throughout the nation. Remember, tribal nations are stakeholders in tribal gaming. We are not shareholders. Third, the CFTC must engage in meaningful consultation with tribal nations. Consultation is not a courtesy. It is a legal and moral obligation the federal government owes to sovereign tribal governments, affirmed time and again through treaties, statute, executive orders, and the government-to-government relationship that defines federal Indian policy. And yet, the CFTC is advancing prediction market products that function like gaming without ever sitting down with the tribes whose economies and legal rights are directly in the crosshairs. There has not been a formal notice, nor a meaningful dialogue, and not even an acknowledgement that, as a federal agency, the CFTC does have a responsibility to tribal nations to consult. So this failure is especially glaring given the stakes. We are not abstract policy questions. All these issues, especially the lack of consultation, strikes at the heart of tribal sovereignty. As compacts negotiated in good faith with state governments and at revenue streams that fund the schools and the clinics and the housing that our people rely on. When a federal agency's actions carry that kind of weight for tribal communities, the duty to consult is not optional. It's fundamental. So we implore the CFTC to sit down with tribal leaders before you act, not after. Respect the tribal government, the government-to-government relationship that the Constitution and federal law and generations of precedent demand. Because when you regulate or fail to regulate products that reach directly into our economies, you are not just making a policy decision, you're making a decision about our future, and we have every right to be in the room when that decision is made, the right to transparency, of due notice, and good faith engagement, none of which we've seen to this point. We otherwise are being denied free, prior, and informed consent. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, President Macarro.